I'm going to be very brief because you're not here to hear me talk. So I just want to really mention two things. First of all, Charles is an incredible pioneer in both mathematics and entrepreneurship. Charles is a co-founder of Ethereum and founder of Cardano, which is two of the most important blockchains that we have here globally. So his work is absolutely amazing. But more importantly, Charles has a real commitment to education, and he supports blockchain programs around the world. And frankly, he supports the University of Wyoming in an absolutely incredible ways. And I really cannot thank him for his generosity more. In fact, the Blockchain Center, which has now been around for 6 years, and in this space, it's kind of a long time. We're getting old. The Blockchain Center wouldn't exist at the University of Wyoming today if it wasn't from the generous support of Charles. So with that, I want to welcome my friend Charles. I want to welcome the innovator, Charles, and I've probably heard you speak a dozen times, and not once has he been disappointing. And so, quite frankly, I think you're in for a bit of a treat. So with that, please welcome Charles Hoskinson.
Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you, my friend.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Can you all hear me? Especially in the back? Okay, good. Just making sure. These AV systems are always notorious. So I appreciate you all coming. This is one of my favorite places to go. I live actually up in Wheatland part-time and then down in Longmont the other time. I have a ranch up in Wheatland, and I raise bison there, so I must be doing well because they haven't killed me yet. Bison ranching is a lot of fun. And then down in Longmont, I have a farm there and do all kinds of fun things. So as many of you know, I've been in the blockchain industry a long time, and this is probably the most exciting time in the history of the industry. So when I started, nobody cared, and we knew nobody cared because you couldn't even give cryptocurrencies away. In fact, there was a video game called StarCraft. A few of you probably played it. Maybe you played StarCraft 2, who knows? And they had a tournament, and the first prize was about $1,000, and the fifth prize was 25 Bitcoin. And nobody wanted to be fifth prize, right? So it shows you how much things have changed and how big the industry has gotten. And what's happened is we have elected the first president who's really interested in cryptocurrencies. And so much so, he's created a czar, an AI and crypto czar together, and he's recently signed an executive order for an all-of-government approach. And one of the first challenges and tasks when we start talking about an all-of-government approach for cryptocurrencies is to realize that there are more than one thing. For the last few years, the prior issues that we had were primarily about asset classification. People were asking, is a cryptocurrency a security or a commodity? And lots of lawsuits, and you probably heard about Scary Gary and all these other things. And it was a difficult time, but the reality is that when you widen the aperture, you realize cryptocurrencies are neither securities nor commodities. They're programmable assets. What the heck are those? They can be anything. They're like a financial stem cell. And as a financial stem cell, you can make them securities, you can make them commodities, you can make them intellectual property. In fact, one of our best partners is the son of Snoop Dogg, and he has this project called Clay Nation, and we do IP with them, and it's strange bedfellows, but we have a heck of a lot of fun with them. So you also could do supply chains. Some of you will enter the oil and gas business or the mining business. Some of you will enter in things involving natural resources. Some of you will be involved in heavy industries, manufacturing. And so when you hear things like, we want to know the provenance of where something comes from, we want to know if something is environmentally friendly or not, we want to know if there was fair trade or if something is carbon neutral. When you hear things like, we'd like to understand where the electricity we're using was generated, is it nuclear power or geothermal, or is it generated from solar, whatever that might be, you're actually talking about something that can be a cryptocurrency or blockchain project. When you talk about secure elections, and national ID systems. This is something that's been in the zeitgeist of the public for about a decade or more. fact, I'm old enough to remember Bush v. Gore in 2000, those old hanging chads. And so it's nothing new. It comes up every few cycles. Well, when we saw that, how do you build a secure voting system? And how do you make sure that everybody who voted was eligible to vote? And how do you make sure that votes were equitably counted? These are basic questions, and they have very hard answers, and they tend to be very fragmented. And the challenge is the people who lose tend to not agree with the results, and at times they could say the system as a whole is broken. So that's a blockchain problem as well, because it turns out the very same thing that can track and trace how many Bitcoin are in circulation can also be used to track and trace how many votes are in circulation. We have standards for these things called self-sovereign identity and anonymous creds. And what's so cool about this time in the industry in 2025 is that a lot of things aren't hypothetical anymore. So many different standards bodies, whether it be the IETF or the W3C or NIST itself, alongside international organizations and bodies, have come together, and we've created all kinds of things like the DID standard. We've created all kinds of things like asset classification standards, regulatory standards, blockchain standards. And as a result, they have created a corpus that people have begun implementing to revolutionize many different industries. So the United States is fully on board. And an all-government approach basically means that every part of the government is going to start asking basic questions about how do we be more honest, more efficient, how do we not waste money, and how do we be more accountable to people. Perhaps one of the biggest projects that's being discussed right now is whether it's possible to put the entire US federal budget on a blockchain, which is a pretty extraordinary thing when you think about it. That's trillions of dollars. That's tens of millions of different sets of hands that are interacting with it. There's hundreds of thousands of outflows to different nations and to different companies. All of government procurement as well. There's a lot of discussion about how do we reform that, because people are not so happy about the fact that the F-35 cost $1 trillion and they're still falling out of the sky. There's so much waste and fraud and abuse, and there's an entire government agency now called Doge, named after a cryptocurrency, and its entire purpose is to start asking questions of how do we hold the government more accountable? And what more accountable means is more accountable to you, the American people. The magic of cryptocurrencies that really makes them special and why I'm still in the industry is how democratic they are. There aren't bureaus or ministries or agencies that say, we're in charge and we'll let you know. And instead, they're bottom-up systems. They're totally decentralized, which means it doesn't matter where you're born. It doesn't matter what your last name is. It doesn't matter what group you belong to, what language you speak. It doesn't matter what your gender is. None of these things matter. At the end of the day, every single person has equal access to these systems. And that's a very American principle, if you really think about it. We put it in our Constitution. Everybody's truly equal. Sometimes we don't live up to that. We try, but sometimes we don't. Well, that's the power of having a system whereby the protocol design itself, it goes from don't be evil to can't be evil. And by the protocol design itself, it says everybody, even the founder of the system, and the poorest person using the system has equal access to it. And the magic of that is that when you create a system that has that intrinsic fairness built into it, when you start talking about redeploying social infrastructure, they just simply inherit it for your voting system, for your economic systems, for your social systems. Because what's happening is the rapid pace of technology is causing a fundamental transformation of the social contracts of the world. We're asking questions like, what is the nature of money? And is money still fair? Sometimes it doesn't feel that way, does it? Especially with inflation. When I was a kid, we had a show called The Simpsons. It started in 1988. A lot of you watched it. I grew up with it. And the most unrealistic thing about The Simpsons isn't Homer's antics or Bart Simpson doing something bizarre or his seeming immortality. The most crazy thing was that Homer Simpson, a high school dropout, blue-collar worker, with a stay-at-home wife, can have 3 kids and 2 cars and a 3-bedroom, 2-bath apartment, home off of that salary. Think about that. We just look at this, that's not possible. There's no way you can earn it, because this day you have 2 master's degrees, you're living in an apartment, you're barely paying rent. That wasn't an uncommon thing in 1988. Blue-collar workers and other people, they could afford such things. Nobody batted an eye about that. But now in 2025, despite the fact that productivity is up hundreds of %, that we have all this amazing technology. I mean, ChatGPT, they just released O3 Mini today. It's an incredible thing to be able to do these things. our standard of living is stagnant, and our buying power is stagnant or declining, and the middle class is hollowing out. So a lot of people are saying, well, hang on a second here. Do we still want to keep this system, or do we want to change it? And if so, how do we change it in a way that's more fair for people? This is the generation, that's why I love colleges, that's actually going to end up deciding that. It's going to take decades, but the process has already started. It's the same with our relationship with information. It's getting harder and harder to tell what's real and what isn't real these days. It really is. You see all these pictures, you see all this audio, you see all these videos. You look at it and say, is that a deep fake or is that real? Still, there's an uncanny valley, but we all know within 24 to 36 months, the valley's gone. So that means it used to be if you saw it with your own eyes, you'd believe it. Now if you see it with your own eyes, you're like, oh, it's probably AI, because I just don't feel like they would say that. We go to facts dissolve into feelings. So how do you authenticate information? How do you know the things you're reading, you see, are actually accurate and true? It's a huge question. Turns out blockchain is a big component of that, because you can actually accurately track using cryptography when things were published and the provenance of that information. The exact same thing with the vote. It's pretty magical when you think about it. Blockchains also help with the monetary conversation, because real time, these 30,000 cryptocurrencies, each and every one of them kind of sort of behave like central banks. They print money, they have distributions, they have monetary policies. Could you imagine going to somebody in 1950 who studied monetary policy, got a PhD from MIT, dreamed of working one day at the Fed, and tell them, well, why would you want to go work at the Fed? You can run a real-time experiment, create your own central bank, and get 5 million people to play around with it from 100 countries. They look at you and say, man, there must be some drugs in the water or something. It just wasn't possible to even conceive of such a thing. And to say that we're going to do this real-time in parallel with tens of thousands of experiments. The President of the United States decided to launch his own meme coin. And we're all in the industry just trying to figure that one out. We're like, what the heck is this Trump coin? Some people say it's a meme coin, scam coin. Other people say maybe it's like a political prediction market that real time tells you the political influence and power of the President of the United States. If the number goes up, he's more powerful. If the number goes down, he's less powerful. Slightly more generous interpretation. But nonetheless, it opens a debate, doesn't it? You have to think about it. You have to scratch your head and say, wow, that's truly an incredible thing that we have real time, all these experiments running. Think about AI. I, for one, don't feel super comfortable over the idea that 5 or 10 companies are going to control one of the most meaningful and powerful technologies in human existence. OpenAI and Google and Apple and Facebook and these other companies, they're not just companies, they're basically becoming gatekeepers to the generation of the creativity of a generation. If you think about it. Many of you use ChatGPT or something like it to help you with your homework, to help you think about things, to help you write a draft. Well, what if it's bent in a certain way? Makes you think a certain way. Subtle, or sometimes not so much. What impact does that have on society? And the people who control those things, don't they have a little bit too much power? Because we're told we live in a democracy or a constitutional republic, depending on who you ask. But it is a little problematic that 5 people you didn't elect and you have no ability to replace have so much influence. So maybe, just maybe, such a thing should be decentralized. And therefore, our industry is working on it. We have proof of useful work, and we have all these other newfangled technologies and interesting things. And over the next few years, we're going to figure out how to build something that's competitive. And the difference is nobody owns it or controls it. It becomes like a public good. There are many things like this. This industry as well is on the forefront of a lot of new modes of computation. Quantum computing in particular is something we're very interested in. And actually, the cryptocurrency space is one of the world leaders in implementing defenses against quantum computers. Quantum computers are not only coming, there's incredible progress, especially with optical quantum computers and the math of error correction. I usually go to UCSB every year, and we get a State of the Union at Crypto, which is one of the largest cryptography conferences. It's been going on since the 1970s. And Adi Shamir is there, and all the other RSA guys, and usually they have a professor or two who's an expert in quantum computers. He says, oh, here's what's going on with quantum computers. And it was always the same speech. In fact, you just replaced the dates. They're coming, but we got a lot of work to do. The last few years, it's not only are they coming, we're pretty surprised how fast they're coming. So in the 10 or 20 year mark, we will start seeing an impact of these new devices in industry. The problem is the hard problems that we use for cryptography don't work so well in the presence of a quantum computer. So you have to defend against them. So how do you know that your protocols work? Well, you have to create financial incentives to break them and get lots and lots and lots of people attacking them. And then if nobody breaks it after a while, you start developing some confidence above and beyond the mathematical proofs and the adversarial models that these things have. Our organization's published about 240 papers now, with 168 scientists in 11 institutions, including some here. And the single most effective thing in our 10-year legacy of doing this has been the crowdsourcing of ideas and adversarial models. No matter how much math we throw at it and how many peer review sessions we have, almost all the commentary that's come from the industry has been, in many ways, superior. Because our competitors actually try to break our things, and they hire cryptographers too, and apparently if they have stock options, they're very motivated. Go figure. Crypto works that way. So our industry's implemented a lot of great post-quantum algorithms. Falcon and Algorand, for example. There's a lot of people looking at XMSS, especially modifications of it. That's a hash-based crypto scheme. And it's starting to revolutionize things like Starks, which are zero-knowledge proofs that are resistant to quantum computers, and frameworks like lattice-based crypto frameworks like crystals that NIST just recently standardized. We're exploring it, we're looking at it. And it's just an extraordinary thing. We're taking this bizarro edge case of academia and we're making it vogue. In real time, we watch every year to 2 years, 10 years of progress. The same was done with zero-knowledge cryptography, proving stuff about stuff without telling people. How do I know you know the password? Well, one easy way is to tell me, right? Okay, well, what if I don't want to tell you, but I still want to convince you? How do I convince you? What if you go to a bar and they say, hey, I'd like a drink? They say, all right, well, prove you're over 21. How do you do that without showing your ID? That's the zero-knowledge world. And this was something invented by Sylvia Macaulay, who's now a Turing Award winner. It's the Nobel Prize of Computer Science, back in the 1980s in MIT. If you counted up the amount of zero-knowledge papers that were published from 1980 to 2000, there are more papers published in 1 year than the 1980s and the 1990s combined because of the cryptocurrency space. So this is a giant engine to, once it captures something, to accelerate research and bring people together and bring institutions together and finance them. And that's another incredible value and why it's so exciting to be alive right now. Because at the end of the day, we're not solving zero-knowledge problems for the sake of new zero-knowledge cryptography. We want private voting. We want disclosure systems, whistleblower systems, underground newspapers. We want supply chains where you can prove properties of things in the supply chain without wrecking the competitive advantages of the companies that participate in them. We want to be able to do government secrets like security clearance stuff and all types of things like that. These are the things we want. And so these are practical use cases, and the blockchain space is evolving them. So I truly love this industry, and that's why I've been in it for about a decade and a half. Steve and I, as I said, when I say we're getting old, we actually mean it. We are. You know, in fact, that picture of me it seemed like so long ago, but it really wasn't. I'm getting fat and hair is falling out. But it keeps me young when I look at this industry, because every day I get to wear a different hat. Some days I wake up and I get to be an expert on supply chains, and other days I wake up, I get to be a monetary theory guy, and other days I get to wake up and hang out with some politician, you know, who's got some interesting ideas about life, and other days I get to wake up and I get to think about video games and the future of video games, massive multiplayer games. In fact, one of our game developers is here. Where's Trim? There's Trim. He did Hydra Doom. We took the old Doom game that John Carmack and Romero made in the 1990s, and we got it working on a blockchain, which was actually a lot harder than you would think for a game that was made 30 years ago. And not only did we make it, we actually had a $100,000 death match that we held at the HyperX Arena in Las Vegas. Was that about a week ago? Yeah, about a week ago. There we go. That's my day. And it's fun. And I was just like you 15 years ago. I was filled with hope and didn't have particularly a lot of reputation or skills or knowledge. Just learned it all along the way. And that's the final point of the speech is, you know, this is not an invitation-only industry. I have 6 companies, and a lot of them are in industries that are invitation-only. Like I have a clinic up in Gillette, Wyoming. We have 11,000 patients. All the people there who lead that are doctors. And they have great credentials, and they've been there for decades, and they have all this life experience. That's not the case in the cryptocurrency space. All the leaders, they're people just like the people in this room who got very passionate about something. They embraced self-study. They got interested in solving a problem, obsessed with solving that problem. That's where the greatness comes. The skills you're learning here at this university, this is the #2 university in the world for blockchain. Think about that, $2 trillion industry. You're going up against Harvard and MIT and Cambridge and Oxford. You're going up against these colossal budgets, and to be even in the top 5 would be incredible. To be flirting with being the #1 university in the world is a truly remarkable accomplishment, and it's kudos to the leadership of the university for accomplishing that. But that is your opportunity, because that means you also have the network of a university that's in the top 5. That means your fellow students, it means your fellow professors. They're a phone call away, they're an email away from being able to figure out how to solve something very interesting. And being involved in such an incredibly exciting time that's so meaningful that even the US government itself is now treating it as a first-class citizen, along with Medicare and education and foreign policy and all these other things. It's something I wish I would have had when I entered the space. It was a heck of a lot harder in 2010. Nobody took us seriously. We were a bunch of crazy rebels, and the very first thing I did was just make some PowerPoint presentations on why Bitcoin was great. And everybody called me a genius for it. It's like, I literally put like 2 days into this, okay? It's not a lot of work. And that was just a fun and different time. But now it's pretty special. So we have a little bit of a demo for you, and as a showcase of how innovative the space is and how your university is doing really interesting and cool things. What we're going to do is we're going to showcase a real-world asset pattern on Cardano, a blockchain that I built. So we have kind of a fake stablecoin that's created, and we're going to deploy it to the mainnet, and then we're going to freeze it and seize it. This is a pattern that Circle uses and Tether uses and other people use, and we were very keen to show how you can do this. But the point of this demo is to say that this is the beginning of a conversation that's starting actually at your university about creating universal standards for real-world assets. The industry is going to grow from about $3 trillion conservatively to 10 to 20 trillion, according to a lot of different industry insiders like Citigroup and Chase and others, over the next 10 years, principally because the next value flow is going to be things like intellectual property, real estate, tokenized securities, all kinds of things like that. The challenge in our industry is we don't have good standards for this. It's a huge problem because people don't have strong incentives to work together. People create a standard for their ecosystem, and somebody else creates a standard for their ecosystem. It's almost like the 1990s. Some of you may remember Internet Explorer, and there were open standards bodies, and they were working real hard at CSS and HTML standards. And then you had Microsoft with ActiveX. And they said, well, you know, we don't really need to render CSS properly. We have our own thing. And when they had 90% of the market, they could do that. But when they lost the market, when Apple moved on from Flash and other things, open standards went out. So our hope here is to create a working group and bring a lot of people in industry under the guidance of the Blockchain Technology Lab. And if some of you are interested in these topics for your domain, as students or faculty, you can participate too. That's the magic of having this university and why it's the #2 school. It not only has the opportunity to do something, it has the opportunity to do something that the US government takes seriously, to do something that could be adopted by Ethereum or Solana or Cardano or XRP or a large ecosystem that influences the lives of tens of billions of people and potentially could become the standard that we use to define trillions of dollars of value long term. You could work on that as an undergrad. Think about that. It's like being around at the beginning of PGP or being around at the very beginning when JavaScript was created, hanging out with Brendan Eck, perhaps giving him better advice. It's okay, Brendan and I are actually friends. He's a good guy. But he only had 53 days, too, to make JavaScript. So that's a rare opportunity. And I figured it'd be cool to share that with everybody here and let you guys know. And if you're interested, just let Steve know. They'll be putting it together over the coming months. It'll take probably a semester or two. And what's going to be really fun is it's also going to introduce you to a lot of the actors inside the industry because we'll be inviting a lot of RWA vendors and other people to come on in and work on it. And the end result's an open standard, an open protocol that we can kind of take to people all throughout the industry and they can use, and hopefully it works its way through. Even if it doesn't, the very act of doing it builds a great degree of competency. Learning is not about reading a book and taking a test. Learning is about applying the knowledge that you've been given. As fun as this industry can be, it is probably the most complicated because you have to be an expert at so many things. Even as a computer scientist, you get lost. Distributed systems, programming language theory, cryptography, network theory. There's so many subfields, specialized things, specialized knowledge. You go to your guy, like, what's a Merkle tree? Yeah, I remember something about that. Okay. And that's like one thing of 400 things that are going on just on the computer science side. But then you also have to be an economist. Why do some cryptocurrencies become wildly successful, like Solana or Ethereum or Cardano, that are in the top 10 and are worth tens of billions of dollars, and others fail? There's 30,000 of them, but there's a top 100, and the top 100 have 99% of the value. It's game theory. So what about the game theory made them successful? That in itself is a PhD dissertation plus. Several papers, several dissertations to write just to understand what happened, not where the field is going. How did Bitcoin take off? There was no central bureau. It was all just voluntary action. People started mining. Ordinarily, an economist would say, well, because they were paid. Well, hang on a second here. Could you sell Bitcoin for the first year? For the first year and a half? No, I tried. It wasn't possible. I just accumulated them. It actually worked out for me. I'm actually very glad we didn't have liquid markets, now that I think about it, except for something that I bought on BitMit. I have the world's most expensive Xbox 360. But why did people mine then, if you didn't pay them? Why did they waste resources? Why did they live in hot apartments with their computer going 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? That's a whole academic discipline unto itself. Then there's user experience and good old-fashioned application design and business. A lot of you might want to be entrepreneurs one day and write cell phone apps and write web apps and do the next big thing and go viral. So what is the user experience? Because Phil Zimmerman failed this. In fact, I was in Israel years ago. Phil Zimmerman is the guy who created PGP, and he's the most bitter man you'll meet because he had all the secrets to the internet. How many people would like a password-free internet where your login is you just click a button and it's secure and there's no identity theft? And how many people would like to have the ability to prove anything you want about yourself by clicking a button and no one can hack it? Well, that's PGP and Web of Trust. And he had this in 1991. So why do we have usernames and passwords? Why do we have any of these things? Because the user experience of PGP is about the equivalent of swimming through a swamp full of razor blades. It's not fun. Yet cryptocurrencies require the exact same user experience. If you think about it, you got a public key and a private key. You send your Bitcoin to an address. You have to sign a transaction. That's the same as PGP at the end of the day. So why is it that something is so useful that could be so great for e-commerce and security failed, but then 30 years later, crypto takes off and it becomes a mainstream thing that 12-year-olds are launching meme coins with, and they seem to have an intuitive sense? How is that the case? User experience design. I don't know. There was an innovation there. Great academic research to ask these questions. That's just 3 topics: the economics, the UX, and the computer science. We haven't even talked about all the other stuff. If you're in the law school and you want to learn about law and policy and regulation, my God, how do you regulate an autonomous organization? How do you do that? You know, and say, oh, go get a bank license or go get this. Well, what if, like, the thing is in code and there are no humans involved and it's self-sustaining and it's in 100 countries, and like what license do I get for that? We're like, we'll get back to you. And literally, people are trying to figure this out real time and write laws real time. This state is also the state that's further ahead than any state in the United States for legislation. 40 laws have been passed in Wyoming the last 5 years. Not New York, not California. Wyoming led the nation in legislation for cryptocurrencies. They invented completely new banking models like the Speedy Bank. They invented all kinds of cool things like asset classification and so forth. I'd highly encourage you to spend some time to look through the legislation. Did some good things, did some bad things, but that's what innovation's about. You make a few mistakes from time to time. That's okay. But if you're a lawyer, it's like, wow, it's an incredible exercise to imagine a legal system that doesn't have agency, doesn't have humans, doesn't have businesses, is decentralized, where accountability is distributed. That's the 4th thing. And I can go down. If I had 2 hours, we could get to about 15 or 20. So that's why it's a complicated thing. So the parting message is, do not discount the power of academia and the people that came before you. every single time I made a mistake in the cryptocurrency space, and Vitalik continues to make mistakes with Ethereum, is because there was a paper somewhere, there was an idea somewhere, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, by some guy or gal you've never met, and nobody read it, nobody looked at it, where they said, this is a super bad idea, and here's why. So learn your literature review. And the problem is you're young, and you don't even know where to look. So the other challenge, if you're going to be an entrepreneur or participate, is know how to bring the slightly older, more experienced people in and take them along for the journey and be patient, because it turns out once they get the Rubicon, once they actually know how to translate in that Rosetta Stone and go from their old language to your language, you're going to open up a wealth of knowledge. Cardano is an example of that, where it's a blending of the old and young. The person who designed Plutus, 65, is Phil Wadler. He created the Haskell programming language in the 80s. In fact, his very first gig was working with Vint Cerf, helping design the internet when he was an undergrad at Stanford. That's his legacy when you look at it. He was recently invited into the Royal Society. But he worked with a bunch of young engineers, and he created the programming language that is Cardano now, the Plutus programming language, and we learned an enormous amount from him. And what was so cool about it was that we came to him again and again with all these ideas, and he'd be like, we tried that in 1994. It was horrible. Don't do that. We tried that in 1997, or Oracle tried that, or Sun Microsystems tried that, or Microsoft tried that, and they always fail. And we said, oh, thanks, Phil. Thanks for letting us know. That one conversation saved us about 6 months a year. And in a highly competitive market, that's the difference between you winning and you failing. So that's another advantage of the network that you're in. It's part of a broader network that's connected to CMU, to Stanford. Your president even went to the opening of a math institute connected to the cryptocurrency space here. So this is one of the best connected universities in the world for knowing the cryptocurrency industry. And once you learn how to translate what you're doing, you'll find that there's a wealth of information to gain. So thank you all for coming. We'll have time for Q&A a little later, but we'll do the demo first. And as I said, if any of you are interested in participating in developing real-world asset standards, just talk to Steve. And it's going to be a lot of fun. It'll probably take a year or two to finally get it through, because things move at that speed when you build consensus. There's a lot of people that like each other and some people that don't. They have competitive interests. So a big part of the exercise is just inviting everybody and seeing what happens. That's the fun part of it. And then I think we'll have Q&A afterwards. Thank you so much. And I'll turn it over to Jan.
Okay, hello. Welcome to the demo. My name is Jan. I'm from IO, and this is Aijen, who we just met. And we're going to show you a programmable token on the Cardano blockchain that supports freeze and seize functionalities. And this demo is part of a proof of concept that we've built over the past couple of weeks to show that a token with freeze and seize is possible on Cardano without any changes to the blockchain, to the ledger, or any hard fork that's required. The source code of the proof of concept and of everything that we're showing you today is available on GitHub. So this includes the on-chain scripts, the off-chain code that builds the transactions. It includes a lot of documentation and the UI. And there's even a Docker image that you can use to run the entire demo locally on your machine. We're going to work with a token in this demo that we're calling WST. And WST is an asset on the Cardano blockchain that's completely under the control of a single entity, which we call the minting authority. And the minting authority, we will see that in the demo, has the power to create and to destroy WST tokens, but it also has the power to freeze individual addresses that hold WST tokens, and it can seize tokens from frozen addresses. It can seize WST from frozen addresses. Before we start, I'd just like to say a few words about what we're going to see. So this is a demo that's running live on mainnet Cardano. So this has been deployed, and we're using the mainnet today. But this means that sometimes we might have to wait a little bit for the transactions that we're sending to really show up on the blockchain. This is just depending on the traffic that we currently have. The WST token was built specifically for this demonstration today, but it's based on an open standard for programmable tokens, which is called SIP 143. And that means that WST that we're using here is compatible with all other tokens that will be built on this standard. And it's also compatible with wallets and other tools that recognize the SIP143. Okay, so now we can start with the actual demo. Let's go to Alice's view first. So we have three different users that we're going to see. The first one is the minting authority, and then we have Alice and Bob, which are end users that trade WST, make payments, and so on. In Alice's view, we have a normal wallet form that you can see here. So she has currently 50 tokens in her wallet, and she can send and receive WST. We're going to start by sending some tokens to Bob. So we need to copy Bob's address. And put that into the send form that Alice has. Maybe send her a couple. He already has enough. Okay, send. And now we've sent the transaction to the network. And what's happening in the background is that we're sending these WST tokens to Bob's programmable token address. So Bob has a normal wallet address, like a Lace wallet or any other wallet. And for every one of those wallet addresses, there's one programmable token address or a SIP143 address, and that can be used to receive all of the tokens that are compatible with SIP143. So any other tokens that are built on top of this can also be sent to the same programmable token address. Okay, there we go. So the transfer was successful. We can go over to Bob's view to see that he has received the tokens. And there they are. Now we're going to go to the minting authority. Now we're getting to the interesting part, because we're going to freeze Alice's accounts. This is the view of the minting authority, and we can see there's a normal wallet on the right-hand side, but then there's also this admin panel that we can use to create new WST tokens and to freeze and unfreeze addresses of end users. And then on the left, there's a list of all of the active addresses that currently hold WST tokens. And these are the two users that we have, Alice on the top and then Bob at the bottom. And we can copy Alice's address now and go back to the freeze screen and freeze her account. You can put in a reason there. And click freeze. The list of frozen addresses is a data structure that we store on the blockchain. And the Pluto scripts that implement the WST policy, they can look at the list to see if the sender of these tokens has been suspended or if they're not in the list. And if they are suspended, the scripts would fail, so the transaction will not go through. But the nice thing about this is that other Pluto scripts, other apps that build on top of this, they can also use the same list and see if an address has been frozen. So if I built an app on top of WST, I could also use the same data to go into that. We added this reason text field here, just as a little reminder maybe that in a real-world application, this step of freezing an address will be the last step in a kind of long manual process. Or maybe Alice's account was flagged because of suspicious behavior, or maybe she just didn't pay her bills in a kind of private system, maybe. But that's what this reasons field is for. Now we can actually open this transaction. So click on this link. Going to the Cardano Explorer. Okay, and here we can see that this is a real transaction on mainnet. It's added a few seconds ago. There are two contracts were run. So one of those contracts was the SIP143 contract, and then the other one was the WST contract. And also, if you click on metadata, and then click on that, we can see that this is what we just entered in the reason field. So here you could put in a link to a document or a website or something to reference the reason for freezing the account. Okay, let's go back to the minting authority. And we can try to send some coins from Alice's wallet now. So get Bob's address again. And now the backend that constructs the transactions, it recognized that the address was frozen, and it didn't even attempt to build the transaction. There is the possibility that we put in this demo here to force send a failing transaction. That's normally not something that you would do on Cardano because you usually just want to have successful transactions. But if you really wanted to, you could actually override this and send the transaction with the failing script to the blockchain, and then you would lose your collateral, and Alice would still have her WST, so it wouldn't work. But we can go back to the minting authority and show the last piece of this token, and that is seizing what Alice has left in her account. So we can go to the list of addresses and select the top one. So you can see that Alice's account is frozen now. The top one. Yeah, mint actions and then seize. Okay. The WST token that we're using in this demo, we built that specifically for today. But the SIP standard, SIP 143, is actually quite flexible. You could use that to write an NFT, for example. You could collect royalties whenever the NFT changes ownership. You could also build something like tokenized real-world assets on the Cardano chain based on SIP 143, and it would all be compatible with wallets and with apps that recognize this SIP. So it's really quite flexible and modular. Okay, there we go. If we go to the addresses list, we should see that all of the tokens are gone and the account's been frozen. So that's the end of the demo already. It was really just the two features. We showed that this token built on SIP 143 supports the freeze and seize functionalities. And we saw how the minting authority was able to take the tokens from the frozen account. But the real work of this prototype was hidden behind the scenes. There are a couple of Pluto scripts that work together to ensure that all transfers of WST follow the requirements that we as the minting authority set out for this token. And the implementation of this, of the SIP code is also part of the repository, so you can check it out, you can audit it if you want, and you can build your own tokens on top of that. But it's important to remember that this SIP and the freeze and seize features that we showed, they're completely opt-in. It's just a couple of Pluto scripts and some conventions for using them on top of the existing blockchain. It doesn't affect ADA, and it doesn't affect any other tokens that we have already. So it's just another app, basically. Yeah, so this was the first step towards a whole universe of programmable tokens on Cardano, and I'm really excited to see what else is going to be built on top of that.
So the fun part about demos is it's like watching paint dry, right? And that's a good thing. Boring is good in finance. So you actually witnessed something that's quite extraordinary when you really think about it. In just 2 weeks' time, what they did is they activated a standard that was dormant but possible in the Cardano blockchain, because these are fully programmable systems. And when people say, does it have it or not, always does. It's just a matter of whether you want to activate it. And this is basically what the world financial system does in banking. You send to a person, they receive it, you can seize it by clicking a button for a programmable token. And that can be any token you want, like a security, a software license, like maybe a digital rental. So you go and rent a movie for 24 hours and you revoke the key so they can't watch it anymore. It can be a stable coin, whatever the heck you want. So when we talk about a standards working group, what that group is basically doing is providing business requirements for what you just saw. We as engineers were very good at writing code and building things. But engineers need business inputs to be able to understand what ought we build. So this particular demo is a demo we would have shown for the state of Wyoming for the Wyoming Stablecoin Commission. The way procurement worked, they decided that that wasn't valid for pretty much everybody but their favorites. That's okay. Move on. But this is the demo showcasing a freeze and seize capability. There's also royalties. There's also private and public components where you share information selectively with certain groups of people but not others. For example, think about real estate, where the encumbrances of the real estate, the easements and other such things, maybe there's private partnerships or relationships, but you don't want to reveal those publicly, but you want to record them so they can't be changed or manipulated, because when Aunt Sally dies, maybe her son wants to change history a little bit and say, actually, no, I never had a relationship with that person and they're not allowed to come on the land, but actually she had a handshake and they were for the last 40 years. Happens all throughout the world. So when you work on a working group, what you do is you imagine by category: intellectual property, real estate, security tokens, asset-backed stable coins, financial products, whatever these are, who is going to use those, what are they going to do with them, and what are patterns of behaviors that these people need from different lenses. And some of those patterns of behavior are because of unique relationships. Like, for example, when you issue a security and it goes to somebody, as the security issuer, you're held liable by the SEC to do certain things for your holders, like giving them the right to vote or other such things. And you need to be able to communicate with them on a regular basis. Well, what if you don't know who they are? How do you communicate with them? It's kind of a hard problem. So that would be part of the standard. Or what if you have something else? Like, for example, you're a stablecoin issuer, and one of the people holding your stablecoin is a terrorist organization. For example, like Hamas, or most recently, the Mexican drug cartels have just been declared to be terrorist organizations. So what if one of them is in Arizona or something and they're transacting with Tether or Circle? And the DOJ calls you and says, you're financing terrorism, you need to lock that down. You can be principled, it's not gonna work out so well for you. So that capability needs to exist, and it lives nestled with other capabilities inside the system. And as Yan mentioned, the magic of this is that it's optional. It's for the builder to decide. These are systems of freedom, and the thing about a system of freedom is you can't predict ahead of time what people are gonna do with it. So what you do is you give them a toolbox, just like a programming language. So the people who created JavaScript, do you think Brendan Eich, when he did this in the 1990s, had any conception of what people would be doing with JavaScript today in 2025? Of course not. Just this whole idea of like an Amazon or a Facebook or virtual reality programming or writing JavaScript to like program a Raspberry Pi or something. These are things maybe if you're really clever you could have imagined, but the point was the language was built in a way that it could evolve in that particular direction. So as you build your own protocols, and as you interface with blockchain technology, you have to keep this in the back of your mind that it's the art of the possible. And that's why I wanted to show a very practical demo that's in your backyard. Freeze and seize is something that's all over the news and people talk about. There's a lot of philosophy behind whether it should be there or not there. But as a smart contract system, in 2 weeks' time, that dormant capability wakes up and people can do it. And then people can decide to use it, and if they use it, you come back in 2 or 3 years, it's 100 times faster, it's 100 times cheaper, it can work in a whole different dimension of things, and people are gonna be using it for all kinds of stuff you never anticipated. Maybe like the latest album of a popular rap star drops, and every time you buy it, he gives you the resell option. So just like the old days with CDs or cassette tapes, you could resell your CDs and cassette tapes. How do you do that with digital property? Well, this you can. Because you can resell and a royalty can go and be paid back. And every time you resell, you get a royalty. You didn't do that with physical media. And what if some of the albums, there's a problem and they want to freeze them, seize them, and reissue them because they want to give you something more? Well, this capability could also be used for that. It's a reusable capability. So we really wanted to showcase something that's in the news, that's vogue. It's something that seems hard, but actually it's ridiculously easy. It's something that you can use today on the Cardano mainnet. Meaning that code is your code, and if you're a programmer or you have friends who are programmers, take a look at it, play around with it. and see what else you can do, what other challenges you can use with freeze and seize. Think about video games. You're implementing a poker application. Somebody leaves the game, you want to be able to freeze their assets and seize them. Because if you don't do that, then if you're losing the game, what do? You leave and take your assets back out so you don't lose the pot. Same use case, same capability, I should say, different use case. That's the magic of this stuff. And I hope this gives you a great demo of it. Anyway, Yan and I are available for questions, so is Steve. And how much time do we have left? Half hour? Okay, you've had your hand up for a while. Hang on a second. Let me give you the mic so everybody can hear you. Okay. JJ will be the mic guy.
We got a second. Do we have a second microphone by chance? Thank you. Here you go, sir.
Thank you. I started programming 25 years before that youngster, Brendan Ike. So when fiscal recklessness, overused sanctions, and unjustified tariffs end the U.S. dollar's role as the world's reserve currency, what will happen to the value of the dollar and of crypto?
The room is a mic now.
The room is a mic.
Yeah, we have a new sound system in here, so you should be able to.
Oh, it's like the God mode okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. So the question's a great question. I love having this question. We were all born in a really fortunate time in American history when America was the gold standard, the U.S. dollar. So we were the world reserve currency. This is the spoils of war. We gained that after the end of World War II. It's called the Bretton Woods Agreement.
You still use it.
Oh. Called the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944. And basically said, like, America sets the rules and everybody follows them. It's like, you win a big war, you kind of get that luxury. And the problem is that when you have a superpower like that, politicians start thinking that you can just use it forever, and the laws of monetary physics don't apply to you. So what happened over 70 years is that many things were wired in where the United States took advantage of its sanctions power. In fact, there's a lovely book called Treasury's War by Juan Surratt that talks about how pervasive the Treasury Department was in the war on terrorism, using all kinds of things where they weren't just going after terrorists, they were just settling scores and other things with other nation states. And they created a lot of situation where our debt wasn't as good as it needs to be. There's too many dollars floating around the world, and a lot of nation states are fundamentally unhappy with their financial relationship with the United States. I saw this personally. I was in Abu Dhabi last year, and I was having dinner, and then suddenly I saw fighter jets fly overhead, and they were drawing the flag of Russia in the sky. I said, what the hell? So I talked to somebody I was with an Emirati, and I said, hey, what's that all about? He said, oh, well, a few weeks ago, the U.S. Treasury Department came, and Janet Yellen yelled at Abu Dhabi and told them to sanction Russia. So anyway, their response was to upgrade Vladimir Putin's visit a little bit, and now he gets a hero's journey. So he walked in, landed, and they had all the people there, and they're drawing the flag in the sky. And it was just a message to the United States that Abu Dhabi didn't have to follow U.S. monetary policy anymore. 20 years ago, that would have not been optional. They have to follow it. It's the same for Switzerland. It's the same for others. So when this occurs, it creates a lot of strife and conflict, and eventually a new world monetary order has to form. So you have these two big systems, the BRICS system and the U.S. dollar system, and they're colliding with each other right now. And what Trump's trying to do is try to get the supremacy of the dollar back up, but it's really hard because we're $35 trillion plus in debt, and there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's not as easy to maintain an empire like this anymore. And the BRICS system is quite powerful because it's being pushed up by China and India and the most populous nations in the world. They have a lot of manufacturing output. They have a program called Belt and Road. So a lot of businesses are trying to figure out, what the heck do I do? Well, I'm here in Wyoming, so it's pretty easy. I'm wrapped in the U.S. flag. I go down with the ship. So yay the dollar. But what if you're in Switzerland? What if you're in Argentina? What if you're in Venezuela? You know, what if you're in like an Eastern European country like Hungary, Poland? You know, what do you do? Do you Team America, Team BRICS, or maybe there's a third option? So a lot of discussions have occurred in the cryptocurrency space about perhaps there's a way to create a better, more neutral money that is a composition of the economic activity of many countries instead of just one country, and it has predictable rules about it. And this is kind of a prototype of an idea that came from the European Union with a shared monetary authority, the EBA. And so there's some discussions there, and there's some discussions even in the BRICS of perhaps doing that. Although after meeting with People's Bank of China, we were at the Swiss ambassador's house in DC, it seems like they're pretty hard set on the yuan being in charge of that economic bloc. So even though they say it's going to be unified, I think it'll end up being China who dominates. So the short answer to your question is, for the dollar, I think we'll continue seeing some dimming there. And the only way we're going to get it back is if we win the next technology cycle. What kept us from collapsing was we won the personal computer revolution and we won the internet. So that brought trillions of dollars into the U.S. economy, and that brought tens of millions of jobs into the U.S. economy. So every about 10 or 20 years, you have a reset in a cycle, and there's the next big thing. Before the personal computer revolution, we had the aerospace revolution. Before that, we had mass manufacturing. So every 20 years, you get something. This cycle, we have quantum computers, we have AI, we have synthetic biology, we have metamaterials and nanotechnology. And America is so far the world leader in some of these categories. We're a little bit behind in other categories, like we're falling behind in synthetic biology, for example. And as you just saw with DeepSeek, it's not really clear if the U.S. is going to be in charge of AI forever. Now, if we lose that cycle, those trillions of dollars of jobs go into another economic system, and they drain out of our economy, which would accelerate the collapse of the dollar. If we win that, it kicks the can down the road, and then really you have to ask a policy question of, should the United States spend more than it makes? Because you're solving a surface issue, but you're not solving the root cause, which is we spend more than we make, and we live beyond our means. And also there's a lot of bad things with the public-private relationships with the U.S. government. And we see that when Boeing can't go up to the space station, or when they do, the astronauts get trapped, and we spend $4 for every $1 for SpaceX for the luxury of that, yet the government still wants to do business with them. There's something wrong with that equation. And as long as that's the case, and it's pervasive across the government, we will continue to live beyond our means as a society. And that's not even counting all the jobs that are going to be lost because of humanoid robots and AI. That's about 30 to 80 million. We got to figure that one out. And that's not also dealing with the demographic issue. You know, people are getting older, and we're going from a pyramid to kind of an inverse pyramid, where most of the population is starting to be over the age of 40, which means less and less are in the workforce. And because of the chronic disease epidemic, where more than half of America has some form of chronic ailment or mental illness, we're getting less healthy, which means we're less productive overall. And it's getting more expensive to maintain these things. Just the cost of dementia and Parkinson's and neurodegenerative disorders alone will cost the U.S. taxpayer $1 trillion a year by 2030. Think about that. And that's just one category of things, not all these things. So you're right to point it out, and it's a great question because it reveals that there's root causes and deeper things. And unfortunately, it's a bipartisan concern. For the last 24 years, 12 years were Republicans and 12 years were Democrats. This is not one party did it wrong or the other party did it wrong. The reality is it's just an attitude of we can live beyond our means. And you can put your rent on a credit card for a while, but at some point your credit card gets declined. So that's why I'm a blockchain entrepreneur. Because not only do we fix problems like this, we build new systems that transcend problems like this. Our industry has created in the last 15 years $3 trillion of new wealth and tens of millions of new jobs. And that's just 15 years. There's no other industry in human history that's grown as quickly as ours. So if you think about it, you say, what about the next 15 years, the next 40 years? This industry could be a $30 trillion industry. And if the United States is the world leader in that, that's going to translate to tens of millions of jobs. And that's why this state passed 40 laws in blockchain. It got companies like mine to move 6 years ago, and Kraken, who just today published their earnings. Your Wyoming-based exchange, Kraken, made $1.5 billion last year. How about that? That's pretty cool. And the laws that were passed brought that here. So that's how you get out of this. You grow your way out of it. You have prudent fiscal policy, and also you understand the trends of geopolitics, and you have to ask critical and self-reflective questions of where have we been virtuous and fair, and where have we been less virtuous and less fair. The Europeans ran into this when they reflected upon their 19th century policy and colonialism, and they had to address that uncomfortably in the 20th century. And when we look at the consequences of the 20th century, there's been a lot of good we've done for the world. In fact, I'd argue the United States has done more good for the world than any country in human history. But just because you do good doesn't mean you're always going to virtuously use the enormous power that you have. There's always that devil in the details about things. So you have to be every generation self-reflective and say, perhaps we need to reevaluate that. And what's so cool about blockchain is we get to reevaluate everything. The social contract, so that lock-in notion of the trust. We get to reevaluate your rights. We get to reevaluate voting. We get to reevaluate privacy, the data economy, all kinds of things, and say, are we still following the Constitution that we wrote? Or have we lost that plot? And if we're not, can we get back to it? Basic stuff like that. And it's fun. You're all here. You're all equal people in this. You could be deciding this 4 years from now. Yes, sir, and then you.
So as a founder of Cardano and Ethereum, what's your relationship and view on Bitcoin?
I love Bitcoin. I started there. In fact, we're doing Bitcoin DeFi with Cardano. And actually what's really cool is Bitcoin DeFi enables Bitcoin stablecoins. And you may have just noticed that Bitcoin announced that Tether is going to be a stablecoin on Bitcoin. How about that? $135 billion stablecoin that makes $13 billion a year in revenue. Also not one of the coins selected for your state. But, I mean, only the president cares about it and Cynthia, but who knows? So we love it, and there's a lot of great people in that ecosystem. There's Stacks, and there's the BitVMX people from Farragut. Iranyago has Bitcoin OS. And what they're doing is building the wiring to connect Bitcoin to other systems. And the relationship is Bitcoin is the store of value. It's the audit layer. And then the other system will be a computation system. So that's where you get your low cost, high frequency transactions and other things like that. So not only is Cardano going to be connected, ICP will be connected, and Ethereum will be, and dozens of other systems will. And it's much the same relationship of tourists going to, countries. And so, for example, you're in the United States, you go to Bermuda or Barbados or something, you spend dollars, they get their local currency, it creates demand for that. So what'll happen is you won't, as a user of Bitcoin, notice you're not using Bitcoin anymore. There'll be a DeFi mode, and you pay your transaction fees in Bitcoin. But under the hood, there's third-party services doing all this orchestration to consume the tokens of those systems. So the more Bitcoin DeFi, the higher the demand on the ledgers that touch it. So Bitcoin's basically tourism. And the Caribbean knows, and Hawaii knows, I'm from Hawaii, that's good money. So we're very excited about it. We want to build it up, we want to grow it, and we certainly will get where we need to go. Next question, I was right behind.
Yes, thank you very much, I appreciate that. So we know the cryptocurrency space is filled with a lot of opportunities, but there's a lot more fraud than opportunities. So my question to you is, how can Cardano, or just the cryptocurrency space overall, filter out all the scams? Because you have a company. Cardano is an American-based company. I have one. It's called the Rebel Union, based out in Wyoming, better known. And I'm just trying to figure out, how can we push those to the front and just eliminate the bad actors in this entire industry?
Yeah.
It just look bad.
Well, it's like asking, how does the Federal Reserve stop, Mexican drug cartels or Hamas or, Afghanistan from using U.S. dollars? There are levers that they can pull, but in some cases those levers are not effective. And so when you look at protocol design, you build things in layers, and policymakers have to make a decision of how those layers fit together for the benefit of consumers. And there are different concerns that you balance. So some of those concerns are consumer protection, which is what you're mostly talking about. So some scam happens and people lose 99% of their value. It's a bad situation. Other things are geopolitical, like we don't like a particular country for some reason. We don't know what that reason could be. Maybe it's Russia invading Ukraine and it's the act of aggression. Maybe it's we don't agree with the economic system and we have a Cold War with them. That was the old Soviet Union. Or maybe it's a Iran thing and that government we've had a grievance with and it's lasted for decades. Same for Cuba. So in geopolitics, this sometimes gets in the way of consumer protection. And it's not clear sometimes, are we sanctioning a person because it's good for our consumers and it's preventing scams, or are we sanctioning them because it achieves the geopolitical end? And the other issue is compliance. When it's all just about law enforcement, it's very easy to get the nation states of the world to come together and work with each other. Because at the end of the day, they have the same problem. Nobody wants criminals running around and stealing money and defrauding people. So we find a common ground there. When it's about geopolitics, it's a sum-zero situation, and it's saying you're taking from me, you're kind of hurting me, and to hurt your enemy, but I don't get anything back. And there's a great example with Switzerland when they started going after Russia. There were tens of billions of dollars of financial entanglements between Switzerland and Russian oligarchs. So when the Treasury Department came in and said, freeze all these things, the Swiss said, okay. And the Swiss were like, so those billions of dollars in banking fees, you can give that to us, right? And they're like, yeah, about that. We'll call you later. And so now Switzerland's sitting there and they're saying to themselves, oh, holy shit, what do we do? You know, it's like that's a lot of money, man. And the same thing happened in 2008. After Obama got elected, he said, we're going to go after all the U.S. citizens who are cheating on their taxes. So he found ways to get into Switzerland. They opened up the Swiss banks, and they started draining the swamp there, which, from our view, is a good thing. We get tax revenue. But that was an industry for them, as it was for Barbados and Panama and all these other places, which resulted in thousands of jobs and a lot of local prosperity. So they lost that industry and they had to find another one, which is why they were very friendly for cryptocurrencies, because it helped replace an industry that they had lost, basically. So it's a complicated question. And the issue is sometimes incentives are aligned that even if the technology is great and the companies are goodwill and the US wants to do something or the Europeans want to do something, geopolitics get in the way, incentives get in the way. So the superpower of cryptocurrencies is carrot, not stick. If you make it more profitable in the end to follow the system and follow the intent of the system, you tend to have honest majorities inside the system, as opposed to have to punish people. If you screw up and make the wrong block in Bitcoin and try to defraud the network, there's no regulatory body or authority that's floating around saying, we're going to go ahead and punish you and the bad block authority is going to be there and crush you into the ground. You just lose money. Because if the network doesn't accept that bad block, all that reward goes to somebody else. And as the price of Bitcoin goes up, the cost of fraud goes up and up and up. So you better be honest, because at the end of the day, you're bankrupting yourself. And so that's one of the magics of these systems. And I actually think human behavior works a lot better for most crime in that respect. Now, there's still always going to be some baseline stuff, and you do need law enforcement. And you'll find that traditionally, when people use blockchains to commit crimes, they typically end up being caught at a significantly higher rate and convicted much easier. A great example is in our industry, a good friend of mine runs a company called Ledger, and his co-founder was recently kidnapped. And it was a plot, a bunch of people got together, and it was in France, and it was a terrible crime. They broke into his house, and they captured him, they cut one of his fingers off. It was like a movie. And the police managed to catch these people, but now they have overwhelming evidence because all the transactions were done on blockchain. So they got the world's best accountant and they got the world's best system to track all this stuff. And because they used crypto, it was much easier to actually catch the people that were attempting to pull off this kidnapping. So cryptocurrencies historically are very bad instruments for crime. And even the very beginning of the cryptocurrency space, the Silk Road, only because Ross Ulbricht used crypto was it easy to catch him and actually arrest him and go through. So the whole industry has to accept that. And I think sometimes it's a bit unfair because let's be honest, the vast majority of money that's laundered is still the good old-fashioned US dollar and cash. And the largest money launderers in the world are still US banks. It's not the cryptocurrency space. That's why JP Morgan Chase and the rest of the guys paid over $15 billion in compliance fines in the last 20 years. In fact, the commodities trading desk of Chase was under a RICO investigation, and they were convicted, and somehow they didn't go to jail. Go figure. But, tears of justice. But that's the thing. It's like we always have to be comparative. You never compare from zero. You compare from legacy to Web3, and you say, what new capabilities do we get? You educate the policymakers and the business owners about those capabilities, and some of those capabilities are standards, and some of those capabilities are law enforcement, and some of those capabilities are just voluntary compliance that's incentivized by profit. And it turns out the voluntary compliance is the most powerful. It always is. Why do people sell drugs? Because they make more money than working at Walmart. What if they made more money working at Walmart than selling drugs? They wouldn't sell drugs. That's why how many people have walked around, saw somebody on the street with a trench coat on selling bottles of alcohol or packs of cigarettes? Now they do when taxes are involved. If cigarettes are heavily taxed, they smuggle them in and stuff like that. But when all things being equal, if a market commoditizes, a lot of these cartels actually fade away. And so that's another part of the policy is understanding where do the economics come in and how do you leverage those to achieve an outcome. And that's the only way you can get compliance with countries you don't like. It's the same for like climate treaties. we are saying we want to get rid of global warming. So how do we get China and Russia to cooperate in this current geopolitical environment? If the United States passes a law, do you think Moscow and Beijing are going to follow that law? Probably not. But what if we all make lots of money if we do something together? Like, what if we make solar like 10 times cheaper than coal? We won't have to call them up and be like, Mr. Xi, you really need to build a solar farm. He's just going to go and build it because it's 10 times cheaper than coal. So that's the power of economics, is it actually compels people to do things that, without using a barrel of a gun or without using law enforcement. And typically you can get so much further, but not in all cases.
Let's do one or two more questions, because I also want to give you an opportunity, those of you that want to come down and have a picture taken with you. Is that, I mean, it's a unique opportunity to have someone like Keith. So.
Then one more question.
One more question then.
We see the example with like El Salvador allowing Bitcoin as a form of transaction, Bulgaria having some in their reserves. Do you think that could ever catch on with a big economy like the United States, or do you think that we just continue to use the dollar?
Well, you know, Cynthia wants to create a strategic reserve for Bitcoin. Maybe we do. You know, one of the largest holders of Bitcoin in the world is the United States government. It has 212,000 Bitcoin. Did you know that? You know how it got it? Civil asset forfeiture. When people did bad stuff, they took it from them.
Bulgaria's got a bunch.
Oh, they have, yeah. Oh.
Yeah, 200 some odd thousand. In fact, the Bulgarian finance minister says he's going to hold it till 2030 because he thinks that it'll hit $1 million a coin, and Bulgaria will become the richest country in the EU.
It probably will.
Way to think about how that shifts the power of the EU. Bulgaria. So I'm sorry.
You have the United States, some fat weird nerd in his mom's basement. And Bulgaria. But it's a great question, though, and it shows you how quickly things change. And actually, I rather like it because the world gets stale if the same five guys are in charge. You know, what's so amazing about the American experiment, if you read about the House of Morgan, it's a lovely book from Ron Chernow. It's about 1,000 pages long, so it'll take you a little bit of time to get through it. But it's a great book. And you find out, like, the dynasty of the Morgans and where they came from. So J.P. Morgan's dad got his start for George Peabody, and his job was the hardest job in America. Do you guys know what he was doing? He was trying to sell the debt of U.S. states to the Europeans. So imagine the 1870s, you show up and you're in England, which London was the largest financial market in the world at the time. And you're like, oh man, I got some debt from Georgia for you. You're just gonna love this grade A premium bonds, man. Those Georgia, and they're just like you Yankee bastards, you'll default in 5 minutes. The US financial markets were considered a joke. And nobody serious or credible could make any money in Wall Street. They actually had to go to London to do that. And look at how quickly things change. In the lifetime of his son, the entire world financial access went from London to New York. And we ended up dominating for an entire century. So there's a lesson in that things change rapidly in geopolitics and in world power. And in a blink of the eye, you can go from the guy at the top to the person at the bottom. And typically it's because you lack the imagination and agility to recognize where the world is going. We saw this in our own lifetime for many of you. When you were kids, we had things called phone books. The Yellow Book. Elon Musk actually had a phone book thrown at him. So his very first company he started was called ZipTube. And he was like, well, we're going to put all this stuff online. And one of the venture capitalists, who was a little older, he grabbed the phone book and said, you're going to replace this? And threw it at him and said, get out of here. Obviously, it's insane now, but, you know, it made sense back then. It's like newspapers going online, like all the newspapers are going to go out of business, all these things. Because the incumbents couldn't imagine a world where money could flow better when everything's free. And there's no subscriptions and all this. It's like, what the heck? This is nuts. The largest companies in the world give their products away for free. Facebook and Google and a lot of the stuff Apple does and Microsoft does. Even Windows, they're starting to give it away for free in many contexts. It's an inconceivable business model, yet now it's here. And thus the axis of power of who ran the world shifted from those people to the Magnificent Seven, the big tech companies. And now what do the big tech companies rely upon? Centralization. They're middlemen. So Google's a middleman. Microsoft's a middleman for a lot of their stuff. Well, what if we decentralize with Web3, all that infrastructure? Do you need a middleman anymore? Like, does Uber really need Uber? It's a protocol to connect people who have cars to people who need cars. Why do I need a middleman in that relationship? Once I connect with that person, I can just pay the driver, right? So wouldn't that just work better on a protocol instead of a company? And wouldn't it be more fair for both sides because the driver keeps getting screwed? Because what's the first thing a middleman does? The minute they get a monopoly, they jack up the price. And suddenly people make less and less money, and they start regulating it in ways that are anti-competitive. Airbnb is another example. You're told you own your property, that you're not allowed to rent it out for a day or two to your friend or something. That's pretty nuts. I own that property. Damn it, I'm a libertarian. We're gonna rent that thing. But if I have a protocol that does that, who can stop me? Who even knows besides me and the gallows? That's the magic of it. So I'll close there and tell you the future is going to be decentralized. Things change very rapidly. People who are in power can be removed from power very quickly. Budgets can change. Politics can change. It just needs a little bit of a push. And that's what we do for a living. All right. Thank you, everyone.